Regular readers of the New York Times will know that on Mondays there is a feature called Metropolitan Diary that includes vignettes of life in New York City. A few weeks ago, when we had such a hot spell, these were the words in Metropolitan Diary. It is titled Parking Lesson. Dear Diary, I pulled onto West 130th Street between Lenox and Fifth Avenues looking for a parking spot. I noticed one between two cars. I knew there wasn't a fire hydrant there. Getting into the spot would have been a tight squeeze, but nothing I couldn't handle. Luckily, though, I saw that there was a man sitting in the Jeep parked in front of the empty space. He had easily half a car's length ahead of him that he could move up into. I figured I would ask if he would mind making my job easier. Pulling alongside the Jeep, I saw that the man was leaning back in his seat. His window was already down. I rolled down my front passenger side window. Hi, excuse me, I said. Would you mind pulling up a bit so I could squeeze in behind you? No response. Excuse me, sir? This time he answered, can't you see I'm busy? I'm sorry, I said. I just wanted to ask if you could move up a tad, maybe 3 feet. I heard what you said, he said. I'll move up 2 feet, and you learn how to park. Now I was annoyed. He pulled the Jeep up, and I backed into the empty spot easily. Turning off the ignition, I decided to ask the man if he would evaluate my parking job. After all, he said I needed to learn. As I approached the Jeep, the man was reaching out the window with his hand open. Almost magnetically, my hand was drawn into his. I'm sorry, he said. I'm on the phone with the funeral home. My father just passed. Please go easy on me. It doesn't take much to set us off when we're surrounded by millions of people, especially in the heat. So go easy on each other. So go easy on each other.
Hymn number 188 is one of the most well-known in many Unitarian Universalist circles. It's based on that little piece of writing on the front of the Order of Service by Rumi. And there's many different translations to this piece, and I do not know which is the most accurate. But I know there is a little piece that is not in the words in the hymn in our hymn book. That's the part about, though you've broken your vow 1,000 times. That's the part that acknowledges that we are welcome even though we fall short. We judge each other harshly on each other's parking and each other's attitudes. We break our vows 1,000 times, and yet we are welcome here. So please, we're going to learn how to sing those words. Brad's going to teach us, and then please rise and join in singing this well-known tune.
So you'll need 2 things. Open up your hymn book to 188. And then the other thing is look at the front of your bulletin. So I'm going to teach everyone. It's called an ostinato. Though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times. And in the world of music, what you do is you do that in order to emphasize that that's the basis on which what comes above it is going to be done. And that is what the basis of this is going to be. It's a very important message. It's a very important part of the poem. And so if you look at 188, what we're going to do is we're going to sing this together once, And then I'm going to have this side start the ostinato pattern, though you've broken your vows. And you're just going to keep doing it, and then I'm going to bring in this side, and we're going to do what's written at 188. Here's the hard part, because I want to make sure that you get the pleasure of singing the tune. As soon as you get through with it, and then you'll start the ostinato pattern, and then you get to sing the tune. If it doesn't make sense to you, just sing the tune. So let's sing the tune together, and we'll have Robert play it with us. Here we go. Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, worshiper, lover of leaving, causes no caravan of despair. Come, sailing and come.
And we'll join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto. Vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
Welcome to First Parish in Bedford. Welcome to those of you who are brand new, to those of you who have been coming forever, and to everyone in between. You are welcome here, wherever you come from, however you identify, whomever you love. We welcome you and all that you carry in your heart, your joy and pain, your hopes and disappointments, your questions and your faith. We are glad you are here. First Parish is a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and UU congregations are bound not by a common creed, but by a shared covenant, like the one we just recited. What is most central for us is not what we believe, but how we come together, the shared values, commitments, and vision that bind us in loving community. Ours is a vibrant and active congregation. If this is your first time visiting, we encourage you to fill out the blue connection cards that are found in the pew pockets at the end of each pew. This will help us connect you to the many opportunities to engage in our community and with the many justice-seeking, faith-building ministries that are going on here. So announcements, and I'll just invite you to extend me some grace as I kind of stumble through this on my first time. We're still looking for religious education teachers for this church year. Sunday morning religious education is open to children and youth from ages 3 to 7th grade. So that's 3 years to 7th grade. And so if you would please consider sharing your spirits, but also just 20 hours of your time over the course of the church year. It would go so far to make our program vibrant, and it's great fun to connect with the kids and youth. We strive to offer nursery care weekly, but did want you to be aware that today there is not a nursery teacher available. I also wanted to make an announcement that didn't quite make it into the bulletin. There is a grief support group that will be starting up. It will be offered for 5 Wednesdays in October, so the 5 Wednesdays of October in the evenings from 7 to 9. It is being coordinated and facilitated by Sylvia Cowan. It's a place to bring your grief if you're going through a period of loss and to share mutual support. There is also quite a bit going on today after the service. So as is our weekly tradition, you're invited to stay for coffee and refreshments and fellowship in the common room. Also, Reverend Annie will be available for a discussion in response to today's service, which will happen at 11:30 in the Bacon Room overlooking the town common. And then from 12 to 1:30, there is a really important meeting. It's an open discussion that will be facilitated by Mec Groot from the UUA New England Regional Office. And this is a follow-up to the discussions that were held earlier in the summer about the staffing changes in religious education and how those changes have been impacting members and families. So today's discussion will focus on helping us understand what we're learning through this process and what our vision is for the future. So you can head up to the Blinn Room for that, beginning at noon, and grab some lunch, and then move from the Blinn Room into the Bacon Room again. That will start shortly after 12:30. And I did it, so let our worship continue.
That is one heavy book, man. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But just a little time adjustment in the announcement you just heard, which is that the conversation with Mac up in the Bacon Room will start as close to 12 as we can manage it. So you come up here, grab a little lunch, and then go into that space. 12 o'clock will be good. All right. Well, more about this book. Now, I do know, being a woman of Jewish culture, that Yom Kippur has already occurred, but we are still observing those traditions here. This is the time of year when fall is coming on, but it's also the time of year when Jews and some of us who have grown up in the Jewish tradition observe what are called the High Holy Days. 10 days when the new year begins and we have an opportunity to make things right that we might not have done as well as possible, or relationships with people that maybe didn't turn out as well as we would have liked. This is our opportunity to address those. On Rosh Hashanah, the start of this holiday, we dip apples into honey and we share a wish for a sweet new year. We eat a special bread called challah, which is baked into a round for this holiday to symbolize the circle of life. And we wish one another good Yom Tov, meaning a good new year. This time is also known as the turning of the year, and it is also called the Days of Awe, a time for thinking about what our year has been like and what our lives have been like, and about how we can start fresh in the new year. knowing that we are ready to go forward in friendship and love with those around us. Now, this is not a bad idea, I would say. It's the start of new possibilities, of the chance that we and the world around us will be better than last year. Sort of like what happens on December 31st and January 1st, the start of a new year. But here's a big difference. People who celebrate the new year on January 1st have a whole year to keep or forget about those resolutions that they so optimistically made when the year began. Well, that is not true with the Jewish holidays. The changes that you pledge to make for Rosh Hashanah don't have so much time to get stale and ignored, because 10 days later, remember those 10 days of turning, comes Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And tradition says that on Yom Kippur, God writes down in a big book of life, like that one, who deserves a good year, and then the book closes. Bam, shut, done, not to be opened for another whole year. So you only have 10 days to make good on your resolutions if they're going to count in your favor. Now, if you are thinking that this book of life thing might sound just a little bit like Santa Claus's list of who's been naughty and who's been nice, you could be right. But here's the thing. In Jewish tradition, God is probably not so interested in the kinds of resolutions that people most often make in January. I mean, you don't get into this big old book of life here by promising to go to the gym every day. As good as that might be for you, right, John? Or eat more vegetables, or clean up your room. Nope. The way you get written into the book of life is to make things right with the people around you. During the days of turning, those 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, people are expected to think carefully about who they have quarreled with, who they have insulted or ignored, or generally not treated right, and then go and apologize and work things out. The days of turning are about asking for forgiveness. And they are also about offering forgiveness. Because, as many of us know, making things right is a two-way street. If someone comes to you sincerely and apologizes for having wronged you and asks for forgiveness, your job is to forgive them within that period of 10 days, not just sometime eventually down the road when you feel like it. And I'm thinking that if there is a God holding a big book, pen in hand, then that powerful spirit probably knows whether you really mean it when you say, I forgive you. Now, that seems like an awful lot. I mean, just because a holiday rolls around and you've eaten apples dipped in honey, the traditional sign for wishing a sweet new year, doesn't mean that you've gotten your heart and your mind ready to forgive someone who just did something awful to you. Well, think about this. It's pretty easy to just forget about a resolution if you have a whole year to get around to it. And it's even easier to assume that you'll just leave a damaged friendship alone until you're over the hurt or you feel like that other person has maybe been punished enough. But when is the time going to come? Wouldn't during these 10 days be a pretty good time? Maybe it helps to think about the days of turning in a different way. Say you're walking down a path through the woods and you're admiring the trees and the bushes around you, and suddenly that path takes a different turn. All of a sudden, your point of view changes. You see things from a new angle. It turns out that what you thought was really a big tree actually is two trees growing close together, and the fallen log now shows itself as a tangled mass of exposed roots. The things you have already seen are changed by looking at them in a new way. What if the days of turning are a way of choosing to take a turn on your life path so that you see things from a different angle? What if you shifted your point of view to try to see what was going on in your friend's heart and mind when they hurt you? What if you learned to forgive yourself by seeing that mistake that you made from the perspective of your dog or your cat who loves you absolutely no matter what? Maybe the days of turning are days of deliberately choosing to see things in a new way, looking toward finding happiness and justice and peace rather than the anger or hurt that has been gnawing away at you. The view might be pretty great from that different place, maybe even good enough to peer into the book of life and see your name written there for an excellent year to come. And when the shofar blows, signaling the end of the days of turning, we can turn to one another and we can say, Good Yom Tov, and know that the new year really will be sweet and good. So, as we leave for our classes, feel free to come up here and join Christine and Lori and pick up a slice of apple with some honey, for it too is sweet and good. Cue the shofar. I invite all of our children and youth to their classes.
And as they go, we will sing Spirit of Life, number 1, 2, 3 in the hymnal if you do not know it. Spirit of life, come unto me.
Good morning. My name is Liz Hannigan from Lay Pastoral Care. And at this point in the service, I'd like to invite anybody up to light a candle of joy or concern. I'll be here after the service too if anybody wants to light a candle in private. Thanks. And I'll light one more candle for the joys and concerns that stay in our heart. Thank you.
Let's spend a few moments finding that still center within us. Listen for the beating of your heart and follow your breath. Let us spend a few moments in quiet. Amen. Freely we have received, freely give. For the good work of this congregation within and far, far beyond these walls, our offering will gratefully be received.
Before I preach, I'm going to teach you a song so that you are ready to sing it afterward. The song is called Olam Chesed Yibaneh, and those are the Hebrew words, so I'm going to ask you to say them to practice. Olam, Chesed, Yibaneh. Great. That's the entire Hebrew words part of the song. There's some English words too, and the English words are, we will build this world with love. Let's try those. We will build this world with love. Excellent. Now you know all the words to the song. There's one other part, and it has some sound syllables that are common in Yiddish to use, which is yaradai. And so you can sing the yaradai part. So I'm going to teach, actually, the yaradai part first because it repeats over and over. And it goes like this. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. So let's practice that. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. One more time. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. Excellent. That part repeats over and over in the song. So even if you just get that part, you're totally set. The beginning goes like this. Olam chesed yibaneh. Let's try that. Olam chesed yibaneh. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. And then again. Olam chesed yibaneh. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. That's half the song. The second half goes like this. Olam chesed yibaneh. Olam chesed yibaneh. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. And then again. Olam chesed yibaneh. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. And that's the entire song. The only trick is sometimes instead of Olam chesed yibaneh, we're going to sing We Will Build This World with Love. So let's just try that. We will build this world with love. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. We will build this world with love. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. We will build this world with love. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. We will build this world with love. Yaradai, 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 yaradai. If we do not sing now, then we will not sing later. That is what Ilana Lerman was saying on a podcast I was listening to called Healing Justice. And she was speaking as one of the founders of the If Not Now movement. And some of you are nodding, so you know If Not Now. But if you don't, If Not Now is a movement led by young Jews to transform the American Jewish community support for the occupation into a call for freedom and dignity for all Palestinians and Israelis. It's a movement designed to bring peace by influencing folks here in the US. And I am not Jewish, and while Palestinian liberation matters to me, it's not one of the issues I most closely focus on. But If Not Now is near and dear to my heart because of their singing, because they prioritize the song, and they know that if we do not sing now, we will not sing later. Now, I learned this song, this one that I just taught you, from If Not Now. But the most recent time I sang it was at a dinner in my friend's house. And we were having a potluck, and we were singing, and we were eating apples dipped in honey, and we were making paper airplanes that we had written our regrets on to fly off the porch. And it was a really beautiful time, and we sang this song, Olam Chesed Yibaneh. in honor of Rosh Hashanah. And as Deb was just explaining to us, the high holy days are this time of reflection on the year. And I've always been so fascinated by this time of year. Maybe it's because I love the fall. Maybe it's because I was born on Yom Kippur. But I think it really has to do with how much I hate letting people down. I hate it. And so, because I hate it so much, I need that religious reminder to look at those ways I've fallen short, or as my rabbi friend Shahar calls it, missed the mark. I can be so resistant to looking at ways I've caused harm that sometimes I really act sort of absurd to avoid it. A couple years ago, my housemate Christy, my housemate who is hyper responsible and puts a lot of work into the house, asked me if I would water her plants while she went away on a trip with her partner. And I was like, of course I'll water your plants, that's great. And so I watered the plants and for the first couple days, and then I maybe sort of totally forgot to water the plants. And then the day Christy was coming back, I was thinking, oh man, I'm gonna clean the kitchen, like get this place ready, like she'll be so happy when she comes home and everything's gonna be clean. And I did all the cleaning and I was like, great. And then I was like, wait, I feel like there was something I'm forgetting. And I was like, oh, I should water the plants. So I went to go water the plants. The plants were not looking so good. They were looking pretty dead. And I felt horrible. Here I was trying to make a nice homecoming for my responsible housemate, and I had killed her plants. And I just couldn't stand that I had killed the plants. I couldn't deal with it. So I didn't even text her to tell her. I wrote a paper note because I felt like that was the way that I could most easily apologize without having to like even communicate. And I left a note on the counter. And then I spent days not just avoiding Christy, but avoiding looking at the plants. I would go to work in the morning, and I'd walk out the door, and I would be on the porch, and I would like kind of just look sideways so that I wouldn't have to see the dead flowers in the boxes on the porch. But avoiding did not mean I wasn't thinking about it. I was berating myself. How could I be such a bad housemate and such an unreliable person? And I was remembering that other time in college where I was house sitting for my college chaplain and I killed one of her plants too. And I'm a horrible plant killer. And all I wanted in that moment was to just go back. To just go back and just remember to water the plants. It's not that hard. I could have just remembered. I just wanted to fix it. Have you ever been there? Yeah, you made some dumb mistake, you said some hurtful thing, you forgot something important, and oh my God, can I just get a do-over? Can I just try again? I could make it right this time. But we can't go back. And no amount of internal berating or shame or avoidance is gonna fix it. So then what do? Well, I asked my rabbi friend Shahar about this as we were discussing the high holy days in my preparation for this sermon, and she said that the next step in the Jewish tradition is that you ask for forgiveness from the person. Deb talked about that. And then you ask for forgiveness from God. That makes sense in this tradition. And I said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's great. And then what do? And she was like, well, what do you mean? Like, you ask for, you get, God, it's right then. And I was like, yeah, but what about ways to try to make sure you don't do it again? And she said, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. There are 3 things in Judaism that you can always do that are really good next steps. And it's prayer, generosity, and repentance. And she explained that this repentance, the word is teshuvah, and it means to return, she said. It means a return to right relationship with one another and with God. And in some ways, a return does kind of sound like going back. It does kind of sound like a do-over, like a rewind, but it's not that kind of return. It's more like that turning that Deb was talking about, where you're walking in the woods and all of a sudden you turn. And you don't go the way you were going before, you go a new way because you can see things differently. A turning. Several months after this plants incident, Christy was heading out on another trip, and she sent me an email the day she was leaving saying, "Oh, I forgot to ask you, can you water my plants while I'm gone?" And I was like, why are you asking me to water your plants again? I am a horrible plant killer. And I was thinking, oh my God, I just can't deal with this again. I'm gonna screw it up, and this is terrible. And then I thought, okay, maybe I can do it differently this time. What could I do? What could I do to make sure I do it differently? And so I set an alarm on my cell phone. Because if you set an alarm on your cell phone, it rings until you turn it off. You can't ignore it. So I figured if I set an alarm on my cell phone, I will water those plants. And I emailed Christy and I said, of course, I set an alarm on my cell phone. I'm not gonna mess it up this time. Thank you for trusting me again. This was a very small turning, right? A very small turning from I am going to fail at taking care of plants to maybe I can use new tools and maybe I can figure out a way to do this right and restore trust. And those small turnings matter. They matter not just because they matter in and of themselves, that it matters how we treat one another and how we learn to be reliable to one another, but also because they're good practice for those bigger turnings that we need to do. Because if it's hard for me to look at dead plants, how much harder is it for me to look at suffering humans? How much harder to look at the humans locked up in cages because of my government's policies? The people sleeping on the street because of an economy that I participate in? The people dying from bombs that are funded by my country? It's hard to look not only at the ways we've personally fallen short, but also at the ways we collectively do harm, whether we want to or not. And if not now, that movement with the singing was born out of just such a moment of looking at collective harm. And this is how Alana tells it more or less in the podcast. She says, Gaza was under attack. It was 2014, and I was listening to the news, laying on the kitchen floor, sobbing and freaking out. I was in a really confused spot, not knowing what to do. And this holiday was coming up, Tish B'Av, where you say the mourner's Kaddish. It's a time of commemorating horrors throughout Jewish history. And you read this horrible text about Jerusalem falling, and that's how I felt. I was in mourning. So I reached out to some friends. And she goes on to talk about how they crafted a way of mourning publicly together with candles and singing outside the Jewish Federation in New York. And how from that they began to develop a new way of being in movement. And they wanted to create a space to bring their full selves, these young Jewish people who believed in liberation for Palestinians and Israelis, who didn't want to feel like they didn't belong in Jewish spaces because of their politics or didn't belong in political spaces because of their Jewishness. They wanted a place for wholeness. They decided to turn. And they decided that they would prioritize singing, sharing stories, affirming each other. And this is how Alana puts it. She says, we are going to find safety in different ways. It's with each other. It's looking back into history and to our ancestors. It's a return in many ways, a return to basic spiritual practice. And I think this is a beautiful example because it's sort of a double turning, right? They're trying to turn their larger community away from this violence that is happening in this land, and they are trying to turn their culture away from the sort of critical, urgent, political atmosphere that can happen sometimes in activism towards a spiritually grounded movement where we bring our full stories and our full selves and we take time to sing. And I think that kind of turning, it's not exactly like walking in the woods. I think it's a little more like swimming in a stream. Because if you're swimming in a stream and you decide to turn and swim perpendicular to the current, you actually have to sort of swim in an upstream direction in order to go straight because the current is pushing you, right? And we live in a culture where the current is pushing us. And so it is pushing us towards that urgency and that franticness and those long burnout meetings. And if we're gonna swim and we're gonna turn, we gotta swim upstream. And so they didn't just say, oh, let's stop being so urgent and critical. No, they said, we're gonna do new things. We're gonna prioritize the singing, the stories. And I really believe this kind of cross-current turning is possible, not just in activist circles, but in other parts of society as well. In 1997, the deepest ever yet oil rig was being built in the Gulf of Mexico by Shell, and it was called Ursa. And oil rigs are dangerous places to work, I learned. And in the 1990s, the accident rates were very high, and deaths due to workplace accidents were not terribly uncommon. But the culture on the rigs was super macho, and nobody was allowed to be scared or admit to weakness. You stuck by your decisions, even if they were wrong. You committed to the job, even if you weren't skilled enough to do it safely. And if that was a risk, well, then that was a risk. So here was this guy, Rick Fox, and he was the manager of assets for the Ursa project, this new, big, deep oil rig, and he was trying to figure out how to do this huge project in this dangerous macho culture, and he was scared. So he brought in a very unlikely figure, this woman named Claire Noir, a leadership consultant and a New Age devotee from California who was also a Holocaust survivor. And she had helped him to rebuild his relationship with his son that was very strained, and he figured if she could do that, then she could maybe fix his problems about the oil rig. And you know what she did? She put these men who were going to work on this rig through an exhausting program where they were encouraged to tell personal, vulnerable stories and learn to share their feelings and their weaknesses. And it sounds like it was pretty rough and it was kind of traumatic for some people, but it also sounds like it worked. There was an 84% decrease in accidents. And there was an increase in profits as well by the culture change from this new approach. People became willing to ask for help when they needed it. They became willing to say, can you double check and make sure I got this right? I don't think I can do that job. I haven't been trained enough. Can you show me? And this made it so much safer to work there. Now, I'm really not excited about Shell making more profits. I would really rather just kind of destroy that whole industry. But what I think is astounding is that they were able to do something about what we often call toxic masculinity. It was truly amazing to think about how much safer people were when they learned how to be vulnerable. And it got me to thinking, how much safer would our whole world be if everyone who was socialized as a man was required to go to such a training, maybe a slightly gentler version, but a place to learn how to express vulnerability and feelings? What other kind of rates might go down? Rates of shootings, rates of sexual assault, rates of suicide. I think they would all go down. I think our world would be so much safer. Rick Fox, he could not go back and undo those accidents that happened. He could not undo the deaths that occurred in this unsafe environment. But rather than push forward with stubborn toughness, this man was brave enough to swim against the current and bring his whole team with him. The challenge for us is to do the same. To look at the ways that we've caused harm, personally, collectively, where we've missed the mark. To look at these things. Seek forgiveness when it's appropriate and possible. And then to turn and do a new thing. Maybe we see that what we thought was a character flaw is an area where we need support and different tools. Maybe we know that those ideas we thought were just incompatible can coexist beautifully. Maybe we understand how the culture has shaped us, and we begin leaning in a different direction, swimming against that current of disconnection, individualism, consumerism, patriarchy, white supremacy, and all the rest of the crap that's in our culture. To return to the connection, community, generosity, and care for one another. I know that you are doing this kind of turning here. I know this is a place where we are all trying to turn. We humans, we screw things up a lot. We are in a horrible mess. And we do know how to say, I'm sorry. We do know how to forgive. We do know how to love. And we do know how to sing. Olam chesed yibaneh, yadadai, yadadai, yadadai. Olam chesed yibaneh, yadadai, yadadai, yadadai. Olam chesed yibaneh. We will build this world with love. We will keep looking at all that is hard and all the ways that we contribute to harm, and we will keep turning and swimming against that current, swimming and moving and building with love, with love, with love. Let's keep doing the work.